Hi, Power Fact fans. I'm Rick.
I'm Larry.
I'm Steve.
And we are here to talk about an interesting topic. And it arises out of an article from Phil Strader, USPSA president, soon to be outgoing USPSA
Outgoing
president.
Right.
And it questions the need for the limited 10 division. And we've been covering extensively the last few episodes the new carry optics division. And it's very possible that carry optics will be introduced at the expense of limited 10.
That seems to be popular opinion.
I think the thing is, the concern in USPSA is dilution of divisions, and the fear is that you have too many divisions, that you end up with 3 people in this division and 5 people in that division, and all of a sudden you just don't have a whole lot of competition. So it kind of seems like, when single stack provisional division came around, even then they were kicking around the idea of getting rid of limited 10. Didn't happen. But
Yes. And I think one of the interesting things is if you're basing your decision solely on participation, you could argue that we shouldn't have revolver division.
Right.
It never should have had revolver division.
Right.
So I think, that's not the only consideration, but I think it's definitely true that if you're going to have, vibrant competitive divisions, you have to, kind of pick your battles and take the divisions that are popular. But then I think there's also a matter of, can you promote divisions and make them popular?
Right.
Is there a way to make a division seem more popular and go, oh yeah, that sounds like fun? I mean, instead of making it sound like the redheaded stepchild, the only people that shoot limited 10 are people who live in New Jersey, kind of a thing.
Maybe we should just back up for a minute and talk about why limited 10 became, for those people who haven't been around USPSA long enough to know why it's even there, its existence and everything. But limited 10 was really spawned out of the 1993 assault weapons ban.
94.
94. What they thought about it.
It's just a year, but
right. It didn't happen in 94. It happened a little bit later down the road. In fact, we were discussing that tonight, and I think the consensus is that limited 10 and production actually both became divisions at the same time, which was 2000.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. When Rick and I started out shooting, and I started out in 92, and you were around shortly
spring of
thereafter,
97.
At that time, there was only open and limited, and we were shooting in limited division using 1911 single stacks with either 8-round magazines or 10-round magazines, or whatever the case that we could get our hands on, and basically getting our butts kicked in the process. But we were having fun, and that's what the whole entire point was. And then when limited 10 came into existence, all of a sudden it's kind of like, hey, perfect. Before, where we were not competitive, now we are very competitive because we're running, at that time, now if you look at it from 2000, yes, we had 10-round magazines.
Well, what's kind of interesting, too, is that there really were no 10-round magazines until the 10-round limit was introduced.
Right.
I had a belt full of 8-rounders and then my 11-round big stick that I would place in my belt where I thought it was going to come in handy. Like if there's a
somewhere in the middle of the stage.
Yeah, exactly. Somewhere in the middle of the stage. Like my second reload, there's 10 pieces of steel, so that's where I'm going to have my 11-rounder.
Right.
But after the assault weapon ban passed that limited people to 10 rounds, then the market started to get flooded with 10-round magazines. And so I already was shooting a single stack 1911. I was already shooting major power 45.
Right.
So all I did was essentially go and buy a half a dozen 10-round mags and started shooting limited 10. And I felt like I was really racing.
Exactly.
I mean, that was the thing. It's the sport where you race.
Yeah.
And it's hard to race with 8-round mags. But when you've got 10 rounds in your gun, it gives you the flexibility that 8 rounds doesn't. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit there too. But yeah, back in 97 when I started, it was limited and open. And then in 2000, we got production and limited 10.
Right. And you and I were really at that time pushing hard on limited. I mean, there was a lot of competition in limited 10 at that time. And then we get to 2004 where the assault weapons ban sunset. And that's when I started actually shooting limited because I figured, hey, this is maybe my only, not knowing how long it would last, but my opportunity to go into limited division. And that started the discussion. Then shortly thereafter, actually then single stack provisional started to generate some traction or interest around 2006, 2007. But that started the discussion of, well, if we've got that division, why do we need limited 10 now that the assault weapons ban is sunset? However, there's the 5 states, and you guys can help me out here, New York, New Jersey, California, Hawaii, and Massachusetts, I believe, that still to this day have, I'm just going to say, restricted magazine capacity. So a lot of people would then argue, well, that's the reason why we need to keep limited 10 around.
Right.
However, and this is something I'm not entirely up on, but let's say you are New Jersey as an example. Does limited or open there exist as a wide open division, or is it really effectively limited 10 and open 10?
Yeah.
And it sounds like that, and again, this probably depends on the individual states, but in grandfathering of existing magazines, that if you have enough money and you can get your mags or hands on the mags, that you can shoot open.
Well, and there was also the case that on the federal level, you could still buy components to rebuild and repair your high cap mags.
Right.
So if I drove over a high cap mag with my truck, I could get a new tube to put my follower and spring into. Which of course meant a lot of tubes were getting run over back in '94. But it was kind of weird. I mean, I remember I sold a slide to a guy in California who was intending to build an open gun. This was like 10 years ago. I thought you guys couldn't have open guns down there. But it was just a matter of there were enough mags, I think, in circulation that with all of the kind of gray areas of manufacturing, possessing, selling, there was never a shortage of high cap mags down there. And it's probably still the case in New Jersey and some of these places.
Any of you viewers who are watching this who are from those states, give us feedback, because I'm curious of just exactly how popular limited 10 is in your state, and conversely whether limited and or open exist in your state, if that's a game that you can play or not.
Or is there just a select few who are playing limited and open? It's like I started too late, so I'll never be one of those people up here. I'm just down here. Is there actually open 10? Are people shooting open 10 because you can't get high cap mags, or is it just there really isn't that big of a concern about getting high cap mags, and it's kind of an illusion that we actually in our sport have a limit, just because there is sufficient kind of wiggle room there that people who really want to play the sport, either through chicanery or because you have enough money, you can get those 20 round mags and 30 round mags. And so the whole idea of limited 10 to allow people to compete just isn't really realistic anymore, 20 years later.
And that may be Snyder's argument of from the standpoint of his belief is that there isn't really high participation in limited 10.
Right.
And maybe because people in those states, the restricted states, are able to shoot in limited and open because they can get their hands on the high cap magazines. And I would agree, if there's no participation in the division, then there probably isn't much justification for the division being around.
But at the same time, I think it's interesting that limited 10 is a division where every gun that's legal, other than open with the optics, every gun in every other division is legal in limited 10. And so I just think, why isn't it like the most popular division? You could shoot your high cap anything with iron sights. You can shoot your single stack 45 with 10 round mags. All your mid-range in terms of bore diameter, your 40s and your 9s, anything, whether it's a Glock or a 1911 or a 2011, whatever it is, it's all legal in limited 10. And I think a lot of back when both USPSA or IPSC and IDPA were being conceptualized, I think when they were thinking production, they were thinking the guns that at the time were double action triggers, 10 pounds on the first shot, 6 pounds on the second shot. And boy, that is such a disadvantage having that trigger action. We need a separate division.
We can't possibly be having the single stack gun.
We can't have a 3 pound 1911 competing against these double action pistols. So they need their own division. But now everybody shooting production is shooting a 3 pound trigger anyway.
And that's the interesting thing. If you look at production, I believe the attractiveness of production was supposed to be an entry-level sport. It was supposed to be so cheap that you could get into.
It was supposed to be take whatever you already got in the nightstand and come out and
go out and shoot. So the idea was that exactly your nightstand gun, no modifications, you could go out there and be competitive. But unfortunately, it wasn't, I'm going to say, restricted or enough in the beginning in terms of or modifications of the gun, and people started pushing it. And now production guns are highly tuned guns. I mean, you've got really light triggers.
I've been calling it limited with a magwell. I mean, that's pretty much what it amounts to, other than the fact that you can only shoot minor. The major modifications that you can make to a gun that really influence your ability to shoot it are the sights and the trigger. And production doesn't really limit you anything on those, and if you're not familiar with IPSC, which heavily restricts production,
I mean, you can hardly even change aftermarket.
Yeah, you can't replace a spring in IPSC production. USA production has gotten to the point where really the difference between limited and production is your minor scoring and no magwell, and it's gotten to the point now where I think the action type really is not a reliable indicator of how easy or difficult it is to shoot a gun.
Because what's the difference between a 3-pound double action, say Glock striker fired, and a 3-pound 1911?
Yeah,
it doesn't matter that it's cocking or pulling the striker back and releasing it versus dropping the hammer. It's still 3 pounds.
I mean, if you buy there's quite a cottage industry in triggers for all of the plastic frame bullets. XDs and Glocks and
as long as you
M&Ps.
can't see it from the outside. We don't care what happens in the inside.
And so I just wonder if the divisions which were originally kind of broken out by action type, is that really a reliable way to discriminate between the divisions? And is really capacity and power factor, I think, or remain as kind of where you really draw the line. There's this, you want to kind of handicap. If you look at the way single stack was conceived, where they try to develop this equivalency between capacity and power factor to make them, so that you can compete head to head. Well, if you applied that same thing to production and accept that a Glock with a 3-pound trigger is the same as a 1911 with a 3-pound trigger, everybody could shoot in a limited 10 division that had major and minor. I mean, it's just... major and minor scoring, and lump all the triggers together, and virtually every gun that people are now shooting in production, limited, single stack, they're all limited 10.
So you're actually making a really good argument here for eliminating 2 divisions.
Yeah, instead of getting limited 10, get rid of production and limited.
Right.
I mean,
no, production
and single stack. Well,
no, because so if you look at it, single stack is really a nostalgia division. I mean, the thing is that you're using it. I mean, it can only be 1911s. Your gear has to be positioned, here and here.
Yeah.
But that doesn't stop you, say, in limited 10, of shooting a 1911 and positioning your gear here, but still shooting and shooting in limited 10.
So, I mean, the holster is really the big difference.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, if you want to shoot a carry type holster in limited 10, go for it. If you want to put the mags behind your back, go for it. If you want to shoot
the interesting thing that I've noticed is the popularity of. I think it's the popularity of 3-gun. I see a lot more holsters in limited that I would consider carry holsters rather than race holsters. I see these straight drop Blade Tech holsters that guys run in 3-gun, and they're also running them in limited, and it's sort of like, I don't really see much difference. I mean, the difference in draw time between the holster that's adjustable 5 different ways and the holster that's just straight drop on your belt with no adjustability, I think people it's kind of the light's gone on. There really isn't that much difference. And so I think if you get rid of the holster rules, there's not much left. There's not much left to discern between the different divisions other than power factor.
However, I would say probably the reason that they're having the other type holsters, say, for limited and 3-gun is from a retention standpoint. Because if you think about it, you're running around a lot with the gun in the holster.
Yeah, but
USPSA is like, the amount of time the gun's in the holster is basically how fast you can draw.
But I think it's a matter of do you want two different draw strokes?
Right.
One at pistol matches and one at 3-gun matches. I mean, one of the reasons I stuck when I started shooting, single stack because the equipment rules are almost identical to the IDPA equipment rules.
Right.
And I'd gone from limited 10 where I'd run a race rig, skeletonized holster with angled mag pouches, and I just went to straight vertical mag pouches, straight drop holster, and I don't really think it makes that much difference if you practice with your rig. I mean, I think that's kind of the overarching theme that I think, like back in the day, the argument that you can't be competitive with a single stack pistol in limited 10.
I've been in many internet discussions about that. A 1911 single stack is not going in limited 10 is not going to be competitive against a wide body gun in limited 10. And it's a false argument only from the standpoint that if you don't go ever out and practice and you never do any reloads, then yes, I mean the disaster factor for a wide body magazine is less than it would be for a single stack. But if you're proficient at reloading, and I've demonstrated this, and I've shot against a lot back when I was shooting limited 10, a lot of guys who were shooting, STI or SVI guns. I don't hold anything or lose.
Well, and I think I think limited 10 to an extent. I mean, I remember when we were shooting it all the time with single stack pistols. it started to get something of a reputation as the division where the guys who wanted to win limited would shoot to get 2 chances at shooting the same match.
Right.
If you look at the way USPSA has structured nationals, they will match up certain divisions.
Right.
So, for instance, limited and revolver will shoot this one weekend,
Right.
and then open and limited 10 will shoot another weekend to allow the same shooters to win 2 or 3 matches every year. But what it does oftentimes is allow the guy who wants to devote himself to winning limited, he'll shoot the match in limited 10 as essentially a practice
run. Yeah.
Because the stages typically
don't change
much. Yeah.
And it was funny. I remember when we went to the Area 1 in Parma, Idaho, and I'm thinking, okay, I am going to win limited 10. Well, no, because Robbie is shooting limited 10 and Max is shooting limited 10. And it's just, it turned into one of these things where even though maybe on a club level, it was not hotly contested, when you got to nationals or area championships, the same guys who were winning nationals were shooting in limited 10. And so I think it became kind of an oddball division where it was a sport, a part of the sport where you had specialists who shot only 1911s, like we did, and which Phil Strader says in his article, he's never met anyone or talked to anyone who specialized in limited 10. Well, from 1990, when I started in 97, limited 10 was introduced, and we decided about 2000.
I still say that we were shooting limited 10 before it was called limited 10.
Yeah, but I mean, for the first 10 years I shot the sport, I never shot anything but limited 10 with a single stack 45. And so if you're looking for this limited 10 specialist, that would be me, and it had nothing to do with the legal capacity.
No, it's what we enjoyed doing.
It's just what we like to do. I'm a single stack guy, and that's why I just thought it was weird, this idea of introducing a new division just for single stack pistols, when from our perspective, living here on the West Coast, Northwest anyway, where we're not including California in that, everybody was shooting limited 10 with a single stack. It was the single stack division because guys who had high caps shot limited. You know, why would you put 10 rounds in your $125 magazine?
Right.
You know, and so I just thought when all that single stack really did was dilute the competition amongst the people who were already shooting single stack pistols. And so I actually started to register for matches in limited, shooting my single stack gun, just so that I'd have more than 2 or 3 guys to shoot against. Because it turned out that you had 6 guys or 8 guys shooting limited 10. When single stack was introduced, now you had 3 or 4 guys shooting in each division, and it really wasn't very competitive. It wasn't like the good old days.
And that's where we are now. Is that now that they're talking about introducing a potentially new, or I guess it's provisional right now. But the carry optics. I'm sorry.
And Larry's our carry optics guy.
You got it.
Tell us about carry optics.
So far, carry optics.
Okay. Right. Which sounds very IDPA-like.
You guys can have it. I think you should. It's a lot of fun, and I think IDPA should have it.
Have they trademarked the name?
I don't know.
I'm going to talk to
If I have anything to say about it, they're going to call it TAC Optics.
So if we're looking at, I mean, if the whole idea is that we need to get rid of divisions, do you need to get rid of divisions that nobody's shooting, or do you need to create and align your divisions to maximize the number of people that are shooting?
Right.
And I think L10 has become kind of this red-headed stepchild. We have production, we have single stack, we have carry optics, we have limited, we have open. Oh, hey, we don't need L10. But I think if you kind of look at it from a different perspective, you could literally get rid of production and
single stack.
And single stack, roll everything into limited 10 with major and minor scoring.
Right.
Well, maybe it would be limited 8 and 10. But anyway, you could have a single division, and then you'd have all the freedom for optics or, drones. I mean, whatever it is you want. It just seems like the trigger action that used to be the defining factor. It's just it's no longer necessary to look at the trigger.
In the very first day of production, I could see where it was a defining factor. But after production, basically the horse got out of the barn and ran a couple miles down the road. That it's been so
I think it's sights
at this point.
Sights and trigger. And we have such good triggers in our production guns now that I don't think there's any reason to be so concerned about mixing single stack, single action, safety, and the safe action, no safety. There's just nothing to choose between them. I mean, I just don't think that's the place to draw the line. And I'm as nostalgic a guy as any. If you've watched this show, I'm all about 1911s and leather holsters and stuff, but I see from having shot USPSA and IDPA for almost 20 years now, that the development of the sport has just outpaced the concepts that kind of created the sport in the form that it was, that said the single action trigger is king. Nobody else can compete with that. We're going to create separate divisions for that. And I just don't think it's necessary anymore. I don't think that's the place to draw the line.
Technology eventually catches up, and it's caught up in terms of trigger action, and for
just
production of
shootability.
guns. Yeah.
So maybe someday we'll be back to limited and open. If you have optics,
Yeah.
or you don't have optics.
There you go.
You know, I mean, the production and limited,
That's
and
an
limited
interesting
10.
point. Yeah.
You know, I mean, it could very well be
that's
that's the way we're headed. And then the 3 or 4 guys that shoot revolver.
right.
Other thing, of course, is that if you're actually deciding what would best serve the sport based on participation, if you get rid of revolver, then there'd be plenty of room for limited.
You know, it wasn't even that long ago that there was only
We
one.
got rid of revolver. We got rid of production. We got rid of single stack.
Yep. We're back to limited and and open.
Well, you have limited, open, and limited 10, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
3 divisions.
Yeah, but I think maybe it's time, you know, to look at just the whole. I mean, I've thought the same thing about IDPA when they were looking at a new division, and they were considering, or do we want optics, or do we want to have a division that tries to kind of shrink the gun down for more of a division specifically for real carry guns, as opposed to the guns that have proliferated in competition. They're as big and heavy as will fit in the box. You know, I think carry optics, or just the idea of optics on a pistol, is probably the future. Maybe 2015 is a little too early for it. But I think the trigger action, back to IDPA, the idea that we've got a division or stock service pistol that's not stock. I mean, it allows so many modifications now that the difference between ESP and SSP is a magwell. Back to the same thing with production and limited. You've just got so little difference. Is there really a need for 2 different divisions that are so similar? And should we look at things more like the size of the gun, the sighting systems, and just kind of get away from the idea that trigger action is the defining
Well, if you look at the data being match results, that's all true, because you have guys that are top in our area shooting production, beating the pants off of limited guys.
Yeah.
You know,
Of course, I remember when I won limited with a 10-round gun.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, I went to. I mean, it was back on my kick of there's nobody to shoot against in limited 10, so I signed up for limited and actually won the match.
Right.
And
I remember that.
I got some back slaps. I mean, it was kind of fun. I mean, that wasn't common, but it just shows that you know where you find the differences, where you want to draw the line. I think most people would say if the triggers are similar and the sights are similar, power factor maybe that's probably the only real defining point there. I mean, this kind of balance of you can find a way to sort of handicap capacity and power factor like they've been doing in single stack all along. You know, a few more rounds with lower power factor. We were discussing it earlier about depending on the match. You might approach a match and look at it and go, oh, look at those courses of fire. Bunch of 8-round
well, if it's like lots
strings.
of 6 and 6 and 6, then
then you know. But I mean, just
Or
depending on a given
thing.
match, you might decide I'd rather shoot minor and have a couple of extra rounds, because obviously a couple of C's is not going to balance a couple of reloads.
Right.
So I just think it's you know, we need to look at it's a good idea, I think, for all the shooting sports to kind of keep up on where they're drawing the line between the divisions. But I think if you're looking to kick out a division, just in terms of numbers, we don't need so many divisions. Maybe it's time to kind of realign the divisions on a different strategy other than trigger action, which seems to be kind of outmoded
So
now.
I think 2 things there that are 2 interesting points or questions is, one, what kind of traction that carry optics is actually going to gain, because when single stack division was created, it initially, not around here, but in a lot of parts of the country, gained a lot of traction. I mean, people were just gravitating to that like crazy. And you're probably better judging this right now, but how carry optics is doing nationally.
I would think single stack caught on fairly quick, because all you have to do is buy a gun, or more likely, a lot of people already had the gun.
Well, they were shooting a limited 10.
Sure.
And so that's the interesting thing, is that where single stack fit in when it was created, it was a very close niche between it blurred the line between limited 10 and single stack. I mean, it's effectively, to a certain degree, the same gun in most cases with a different holster position and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Carry optics in a sense, is not competing, so to speak, directly against attraction of single stack or limited 10 or limited. It's really competing against production.
Yeah, it is.
So,
because so far,
but it
the
is competing against
same-
some other existing division that's very similar. I was going to say the other interesting thing where this may go is that now that we have a new, or will have a new USPSA president coming in, of what his thoughts are. I mean, obviously Strader does not have any, doesn't see the future for limited 10 or the desire, need for it or anything.
Yeah.
Maybe the new USPSA president coming in may take some of these discussions that we're having here and saying, hey, you know, maybe we do need to look at, now that production has advanced so far that the line is blurred between a single stack and a double action pistol, that maybe we can condense it down into, you know, a new division that's not limited 10. It's not production, it's not single stack, but call it what you
Well, and
want.
haven't we had safe action triggers win limited 10 at nationals? I mean, Glocks are winning limited
sure.
10.
Yeah.
It's not a
Yeah.
single action
No.
sport,
Oh,
you
no.
know.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so I think that's plenty of evidence that.
Well, hell, you got Glock shooting an open division.
Well, yeah. But the idea again, it's
Larry.
not just
Very soon.
my theory that
Yeah.
I think the triggers are so similar that it doesn't matter. It's been demonstrated that even
Right.
in the divisions where single action triggers are allowed, Glocks are still winning. So it's a non-issue, and I think they should look at that and just consider the idea that let's have the divisions aligned on a different basis other than this perceived difference or advantage in trigger action.
Yeah,
And
because
so
it is,
limited 10 I think is a cool division. It's major, it's minor. You can shoot your
you can be racy if you want
you
to.
can be racy, you can wear your
tactical if
leather
you want to.
holster,
Yeah,
you know,
right,
I mean it's
right.
it's the division where every gun fits, but trying to kind of mold it into a division where every gun is competitive. I think that's
That's the key thing.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Because I mean, obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but if you are wearing a leather holster with your gun behind your hip and all your magazines behind your hip in limited 10, you might lose a little time to somebody who has their mags up front and they're holstered in a more racy position or a more racy type holster.
Yeah.
But again, it's a personal decision that you make. I mean, it's like, you know, what are you doing for fun? If you want to win, you're obviously going to, you know, align yourself to win. If you're out there to have fun, you'll align yourself to have fun.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting too, and I think it's and the other thing I think, if we're talking about things that I think, is that when limited 10 was in its evolution, kind of in the 90s, the most popular law enforcement pistols in the country were all 40s.
Mm-hmm.
We'd all made our move from 9 to 40, and now
It's
we're
going
moving
back
back
to
from
nine.
Starting to
40
go
to
back,
9.
Yeah.
And so I think the idea that we need we need to kind of favor any particular cartridge, like 9mm was the favored cartridge of production, 45 was the favored production or the favored cartridge of single stack. You know, I think some of that is, and I don't know if it has to do with power factor or perception or what the deal is, but I think, you know, again, it's one of those things where the line is kind of blurred. High performance 9mm ammo might be the best pistol ammo there is, and there's ever been. You know,
you
and
make a lot of
I
arguments for
still
that.
argue that a bigger hole is a better hole.
Right.
But but you know, when you look at it, if you're talking about ammo performance, and that was the basis for major and minor. If you go back to the 1970s, back to the 1960s, the idea that a bigger bullet is better and it's harder to shoot because it's more powerful, but we're going to give you a benefit for shooting it by giving you more points.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's appropriate anymore.
Yeah, because
you know.
I mean, like exactly, you point out just in terms of self-defense ammunition is that the high-performance 9mm ammo that's out these days is competing very near, or if not almost identical to say 45.
Yeah, and I think
know,
the
or
FBI
40.
has decided to go back to 9mm.
Right.
And a lot of police departments, rather than doing their own investigation into ammo
just follow,
performance, they just
yeah,
follow what
right.
the FBI does.
Yeah.
So it could be that maybe there is still a niche for major power, but maybe we should consider that the whole sport revolves around minor scoring, and then make major the kind of, well, if you want to shoot major and load 8 rounds, that's okay. But so I think there's a lot of room for discussion. If you just want to throw a division out, I think we should look at what constitutes the difference between the divisions and look at that a little more closely before deciding, well, we have to have 6 divisions, and this is the one we're going to throw out. Maybe decided we could get along with 5, and limited 10 is one of those 5.
Yeah. So, if any of you have any comments on this, and I'm sure you probably do, let us know your thoughts on this. And especially if you are in one of those 5 restricted states of what the situation is like in your state. Are you is everybody effectively shooting open 10 and calling it open, but it's open 10 because that's all you can get, or are people able to use high cap magazines or get high cap magazines? And if they are, is limited 10 very popular in your state at all, or if not? The other question is that, what do you view as the best answer here for, let's just say, limited 10, and or some of the ideas that Rick's thrown about of combining single stack production and limited 10 into a single division, call it what you want, something different.
Rick's division.
Yeah,
I would
Rick's
prefer,
division,
but you can call it whatever you want.
And go from there. So.
Sounds logical, but we know USPSA is not going to touch production. That's just that's a cash cow for them. So.
Well, unless
But I
it's
do
combined
like-
together as another division.
I-
Why does it have to be production? Why would it be? Why would production be a cash cow for USPSA?
Well, it's the
But wouldn't it be all that much
second most
better
popular
if you had that many more competitors? You go to a major match and instead of having 50 in production and 20 in limited 10 and 80 in limited, if you had 90 people competing head to head in the same
200
division,
people in the same
300,
Yeah.
300
400,
people.
400.
I mean, I think that'd be. People always talk about competitiveness, and you want to win nationals, and it seems like the idea is getting as many people into the fewest divisions would be a good idea. It increases competition. There's not so. That you don't have to be so specialized. Oh, here's my limited 10 gun. Here's my single stack gun. Here's my production gun. You could conceivably have one gun that would be limited only by the optical sight or iron sight.
Right.
And then if you had the little replaceable plate on the slide, you could shoot it and carry optics too.
Yeah,
So, you could conceivably have a single gun that you could shoot in like 4 different divisions.
That's what I try to do.
Yeah.
Well,
So let us know what you think
conceivably
about it.
shoot in 4 different divisions, which you don't need, which we can condense into one division.
Yeah. We need limited and open. I think we're back to that. Limited and open. We never needed more than that.
Yeah.
Those are my 2 favorites, actually. So I'm good with that.
Okay. So send us your thoughts. Let us know what your opinions are on all this. I'm sure there'll be quite a few and broad broad opinions.
Entertain us as we have entertained you.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in. The usual deal. Wait, if I can see you remember this.
Yeah,
PowerFactorShow.com. PowerFactorShow@gmail.com is the email. Facebook.com/PowerFactorShow. Okay, I'm going to make a guess here. YouTube.com/PowerFactorShow?
Yeah.
Is that close enough?
Something like
I get
that.
you there.
That's why
Just
I
go
always
to
use a joke. It's
YouTube.
where you're watching it right now. So.
Yes.
All right. Thanks for
All right,
tuning in, and we'll see you
thanks.
next time.
Adios.